My name is David Rudder. I'm a past vice president or vice chair of the Ohio Watershed Professionals Association, of which Sarah Seal Hall is the current president of for that. Um, and we get to have Kat talk to us today, um, very much through good happenstance on our part. I am a senior environmental planner for water quality program here at Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana Regional Council of Governments in Cincinnati. We were doing a project trying to determine if there was enough data available that we could assess bridges to see if they were causing impacts to water quality. And what we determined very quickly was we did not have enough data to be able to do that. We did not have a means of doing that. And our water quality intern doing a very much due diligence came across the Southeast Aquatic Resources Partnership, centered in the southeastern portion of the U.S., and that they had a stream crossing program in place, a tool that would allow for the prioritization of those stream crossings if you went out and collected some data on that. So we quickly got in touch with Kat, said, "Hey, this is awesome. Can we learn how to do this in Ohio?" Kat said, "Hey, we just got funding to expand this into the Great Lakes region. So we'll be working on it." So there's good timing on that part. And we were able to just this last fall host a class up here in Northern Kentucky in partnership with Sanitation District Number 1 to get some folks through that training. And so I think this is something that a lot of folks across Ohio are certainly interested in and would like to know more about. So with that, we've invited Kat to come and present at one of these lunch and learns. So I'm very excited to see the number of folks who have registered and who are in attendance with us today. And so I will introduce Kat to you. So Kat, as I said, is with the Southeast Aquatic Resources Partners. Has BS from the University of Delaware in wildlife conservation and a master's in environmental management from Duke University's Nichols School of Environment, and has been with actually I don't actually know how long you've been with SARP within that, but she is our GIS guru and master of the stream crossing data and who we work with and through to get that information uploaded to the system and to be able to run that. So she's here to tell us today about this tool and a little more about SARP's about SARP. So welcome, Kat, and I hope you all enjoy this and are excited about it as I am.
Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for having me today. I'm very excited to talk with you, share a little bit more with you about our efforts to map aquatic barriers across the country now. We have expanded nationally. And so I'm going to share both information about the road stream crossing protocol that David was mentioning, but also how this fits into our larger national effort. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, your screen is being shared.
Awesome. Okay. And let's see if I can get it to advance here. There we go. Okay. So as mentioned, I am from the Southeast Aquatic Resources Partnership. So we are one of the fish habitat partnerships under the National Fish Habitat Partnership. We are also a joint party committee under the Southeastern Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, or SEFWA. And so we are a very state-governed NGO. We cover 15 states and Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands. And we also are governed by our Southeast Aquatic Habitat Plan, which has several goals and objectives to help us meet our mission of protecting, conserving, and restoring aquatic resources across political boundaries. And one of those objectives is to improve or maintain watershed connectivity. And so that is how we got into the field of mapping road barriers and dams, other barriers to aquatic organisms across our region. And so we started this effort back in about 2011, first with the state of North Carolina, and then expanding out into our region, and then now beyond into the nation with funding from the Fish and Wildlife Service. But the main issue is now that there was never a large-scale database of dams and assessed road stream crossings at the national level, outside of things like the National Inventory of Dams, which only tracks very large structures. And so our efforts in the region were noticed by the other regions of the Fish and Wildlife Service and other partners. And so we have been asked to expand nationally as also a service to the rest of the fish habitat partnerships. And so as many people know, aquatic habitat fragmentation negatively impacts populations of aquatic organisms and their habitats. And as well, aging infrastructure like dams and culverts can cause public safety concerns. So there really is, while there's a big problem, there's also an opportunity to work across priorities with our road managers, as well as our biologists and other partners to come at this issue together and collaborate. And so those are the main issues that brought us into the national sphere and into this effort. And so we are expanding out into all of the nation. By the end of 2025, we will be fully national with the best available data that we that has ever been mapped. And currently we are working to finish up the Great Lakes and California, Nevada, Alaska, and then we'll be moving more into Hawaii and Region 5 by the next in this fiscal year. And so essentially at SARP, we work not just on inventory, but we have an entire connectivity program with 3 program areas. And that program consists of our inventory, and that is the input data set and building block of our entire program, because without a great inventory, you can't really prioritize and find the best barriers if you don't know where they all are. So we have our inventory, and then we have our prioritization framework and tool, which I will show as well. And we also in the Southeast work in aquatic connectivity teams, which are basically state-based groups with partners from all sectors, all types of organizations that come together to essentially build a community of practice within that state and help to make barrier removal and remediation more commonplace and more streamlined. And so in our states, we have we almost have all of our states that have a team, but there's also other states outside of the Southeast that have connectivity teams too. So in Ohio, if that's something y'all are interested in, happy to share more about that at some point. So I will go through the inventory and in particular our road stream crossing protocol, and then also how all of this fits into the tool and finding projects. So for our inventory, what is an aquatic barrier? So first, our dams, any man-made structure built to impound water, not including beaver dams or log jams and things like that, but basically man-made structures, including large regulated big structures in the national inventory, all the way to small unregulated structures out west. There are water diversions. There are also log weirs in some Great Lakes states. So everything that could possibly impound water that a human made, that is what we track. And we also include information on whether or not these structures have partial passability, if that's in a database that we pulled from. And then we also track assessed road stream crossings. So any bridge, ford, culvert, slab, low water crossing, many different terms for these structures. But anytime one of these structures has been assessed by someone in the field to determine if it is passable to aquatic organisms, that's what we track. So it has to have a barrier severity determination. And also waterfalls. We do track waterfalls if we can get that information. It definitely does not have as much information as our inventory of dams, but we do work to collect this information together with the USGS. And so going national is quite the undertaking. And we have developed a framework to really make sure that we are identifying everything that's out on the landscape that we can. We start by taking national data sets of data that's already been collected, like the National Inventory of Dams and the USGS U.S. waterfall database. There is no national assessment crossing assessment database. Now we have one, so that is our national database. But we start with these big data sets, and then we work to plug in additional information from our partners at different scales. So there are regional data sets that are maintained, like the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory and others. There are state wildlife agency databases, dam safety databases, watershed groups, and even dissertation information. So we try to find everything we can and compile it together in one database. We also collect our field data, which is what I'll talk a little bit about today. And we also model barriers. So we use the NHD, National Hydrography Dataset, water body data and streamlines to model where we might find undocumented dams. And we work with students to hand validate those points. We've also done some work to identify low head dams with LIDAR and some other efforts to do research in that way. And so once we do all of that, our data lives on ArcGIS Online, all of our 3 master data sets of those 3 types of barriers, but they are periodically extracted off ArcGIS Online, run through our different connectivity analysis, and put on our prioritization tool. And on our prioritization tool, which is at aquaticbarriers.org, you can prioritize these barriers, but you can also summarize them and download the cleaned information. And so this is where you can get the inventory publicly and download it at various different scales. And so this is what I'm showing you here. If you go into the summarize function of our prioritization tool, you can see pretty much what we know about what's in the country as of right now. We're definitely not done, but this is what we know of right now. So we have 531,000 inventory dams in the country. Just to let you know how that differs from the national inventory of dams, there's only about 91,000 in that inventory. 31,000 have been assessed for potential social feasibility. And so what that means is we've had many partners who have told us that a dam will probably never be removed, all the way to looking at some of these dams on an aerial map to assess whether or not they look like an owner could be approached. So we try to eliminate dams that have many docks around them and things like that, where land use is very obvious. They stay in our inventory, but you can actually filter them out of the prioritization process. So that's what that means there. We also track removals and remediations. So far, what we know of is about 2,700 dams that have been removed that we know of. And then looking at the road stream crossings, there are 6 million places in the United States where a road crosses a stream, and there may be a bridge or culvert at that location. So 6 million of those places, that's a GIS modeling exercise by USGS. And so of those 6 million, 218,000 are where our partners have done an AOP assessment or a fish passage assessment with any protocol available. And of those 218, about half are considered barriers. So if you think about 6 million crossings in the United States, about 3 million of them are probably a problem for aquatic organisms. That can explain a lot of the issues that we see for our critters and some of their population issues. And so we also are tracking about 6,400 that have been removed or mitigated. We do struggle to identify past projects. Oftentimes they're not reported, so that's probably an underestimate, but that's so far what we know in the country. For Ohio, Ohio has about 7,000 dams so far that we've identified. We have not yet performed our modeling on Ohio, so that's going to be coming up soon. We'll probably find more dams, but just to give you an idea, about 1,400 are regulated or identified in the National Inventory of Dams. So we went from 1,400 to 7,000. And then for road stream crossings, there are 121,000 road stream crossings in Ohio. 850 have been assessed, as I mentioned before, with mostly Forest Service that we have been able to locate. And then about 600 of these are barriers to some degree, 4 have been replaced. And so that's what we know of right now for the state. So now getting into road crossings in particular and our protocol. Road crossings are an issue that many people don't always think about, especially people that don't work in resource management. There are so many places where road crosses streams, and while they're not huge, tall, 40-foot dams, they definitely can cause barriers and block fish passage. And research has shown that taking a watershed-based approach where we consider both dams and culvert and crossing structures is crucial to restoring aquatic connectivity. So understanding the degree of aquatic habitat fragmentation from both dams and culverts is important, but also considering all of these things when doing restoration really matters for aquatic organisms. And so just to show you kind of what this means, I picked a basin that we've done quite a bit of work on recently, and this is in Mississippi, I believe. This is the Yakima Basin. There is a rare fish, the Yakpatafa darter. We have a lot of endangered darters in our region. So oftentimes we will do lots of culvert assessments, crossing assessments in basins where we have our listed and endemic, narrow endemic species. So all of these dots you're looking at are the 539 dams in this basin. But then when you start to look at overlaying crossings, just road crossings, not assessed crossings, there are 2,900 road stream crossings in that basin. And as we were talking about, if you have about half of them are a problem, especially in areas where we have small-bodied fish, you're looking at, 1,000 or more issues that need to be addressed. So mapping these crossings is really important. And here's what it looks like, what we know about in Ohio. These are the little dots, the little pink dots are where there are crossing assessments in the state that have been done. Again, I think these are Forest Service lands, but you can see lots of job security here for folks to try to understand more at bridges and crossings and all those structures where roads intersect streams. So just showing you there where that information is. The Forest Service is a really wonderful partner in helping to assess crossings on their own land. And we do have some funding from the Forest Service as well in the Great Lakes to help us with this effort. So the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory and the North Atlantic Aquatic Connectivity Collaborative are some examples of other protocols and regional organizations that are working on mapping road stream crossings. There are other collaboratives at different geographical scales that are mapping barriers and maintaining their databases on a regular time frame. And then there are many places where there's just been an effort and it's a one and done assessment of barriers or identification of barriers. So the ones on the left are consistently maintained databases. And as a national effort, we pull from these databases on a consistent time frame to update our inventory with their updates. So we are not reinventing any wheels and trying to make new sources of truth. We are simply pulling in and reflecting updated data in the areas where we are not the source of truth. And so we are generally for barriers. We have become the source of truth for all of this, our Southeast area, but then also our crossing assessment protocol in places where there is no regional effort, we've also picked up that effort as well. And so the North Atlantic Aquatic Connectivity Collaborative covers the Northeastern United States, and that is the protocol that we have adopted and essentially spread past beyond the North Atlantic, but into the Southeast, Great Plains, Intermountain West, and parts of the Great Lake region where the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory does not cover the state. And so as of now, the Great Lakes Stream Crossing Inventory only covers Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So I think Ohio is covered, could be covered under our inventory. So now I'll share with you a little bit about how the protocol actually works. So again, this was developed by the North Atlantic Aquatic Connectivity Collaborative. And we essentially took the same methodology. We just use Survey 123 for ArcGIS and have it connected to our database. So it's the only difference between the North Atlantic and ours. And we are discussing with our partners how we might now call it the North American Aquatic Connectivity Collaborative because Canada is looking to join us as well. But the way this protocol works is at a road stream crossing, partners will collect specific information at each structure in order to determine how bad this structure is from an ideal situation, like a free-flowing reach that has that with the open bottom arch spans full channel and bank structure. And so this protocol was created in the North Atlantic by a steering committee over several years where they looked at all the different methodologies ever tested in the US to see which were the common attributes that were collected so that they could develop this protocol that didn't take too long in the field and wasn't too complicated, but still gave scientifically robust enough information to help flag structures for possible projects. And so you can see here, the way that the protocol works is essentially at each structure, you calculate, you identify crossing data. You collect information at the crossing as a whole. Pretty self-explanatory and probably expected. Looking at, is it a culvert, a bridge, a multiple culvert with more than one pipe or box, a ford, no crossing at all. Sometimes in GIS, you make a modeled point where a stream crosses a road and there's really nothing there when you get there in person. And so some partially inaccessible, sometimes you can't access it because of private land, etc. We also look at the condition of the crossing, as well as the flow condition at the time of survey. We also look at if the culvert is aligned with the stream and the way the water enters the culvert. We take a bankful width and constriction, how constricting is that culvert? Because if the culvert constricts flow into it, it will probably be an issue later on and down the line. We look at scour pool presence, and we also look at riparian vegetation around the crossing. And then for each crossing, looks like this animation is not working, but I'll just tell you what we collect for each pipe. So for each pipe, you take measurements. If you have 3 pipes at the crossing, you take 3 sets of the measurements. And so those measurements are similar to what you would expect. So you want to take the dimensions of the crossing. If there's an outlet drop to the water surface, and then you take note of how this structure, it differs from a reference reach upstream. What is the velocity like? Does it have substrate? And is that substrate different than what's upstream? So it's very quick and rapid. And so, as opposed to other crossing assessments, this assessment methodology in general looks at how much this crossing deviates from an ideal situation. Again, that's why you go to a reference reach first, because you look at your reference reach and you compare your crossing to what's going on at the reference reach. It's not based on any fish body size or type of organism, although we do have 3 PhD students that are working on that and type of information now to look at fish swimming speeds of small-bodied fishes and compared to the protocol, as well as mark recapture. And what we're finding is that our minor barriers that we identify are oftentimes barriers for our small-bodied fishes. So here you can take a look at all of the parameters and what they are ranked, how they're ranked. Ideally, you want to have a structure that's not constricting any flow, is at grade, so there's no perch or drop on either side. You don't have any internal structures or armoring placed in the stream to note potential velocity issues. No physical barriers, no scour pools, your substrate 100% coverage, and the substrate matching what's in your reference reach, as well as a comparable depth and velocity to what's in your reference reach. So that's basically what you want your structure in your culvert to mimic. And if it doesn't, then you deviate further from your ideal. So ideal is a 1, and a bad culvert is closer to 0. We also look at the openness, how open it is, what the drop to the water surface is, and how high that structure is for critters to get in and out of there. And so these parameters are weighted out of 100 and added together, and about 30% of your score goes to outlet drop and physical barriers, which makes sense. If you have a huge perch or you have a big giant debris blockage, those are going to matter more than a lot of the other things alone. But it really is a cumulative scoring system, so other things will knock the score down. However, if you have a pretty bad outlet drop, that's kind of your limiting factor. So the passability score is a minimum of your overall score and just the drop itself. So it's a pretty quick protocol, although these different equations in the back end are a little bit cumbersome in our actual platform, which I'll explain in a moment. But it's pretty self-explanatory and makes sense when you start doing it in the field. So once you get a score for the barrier, you end up with different determinations, and they really are only 0.2 different, they're binned into different barrier severities. So you'll have no barrier. And usually if it's a culvert, there barely ever no barrier. There's always going to be a little bit of something that doesn't make it perfect. But then you have insignificant, minor, moderate, significant, and severe. And so those crossings are then scored based on those determinations. And that gives you an understanding of what your crossing means for fish passage or aquatic organism passage. So we have taken this protocol and we have trained about 400 people across the United States to use it. And we have collected about 30,000 points since 2015. This is just showing you where we are, where we have been so far and where our partners are really using this methodology. We work with lots of federal agencies. Again, I mentioned Forest Service. We work with state agencies all over, different watershed groups, some counties, departments of transportation. We have multiple partners, lots of academic partners, and Trout Unlimited and other NGOs. So we have a public mapper where you can see where the data comes in. As it comes in, it automatically scores itself based on the input of the parameters. And you can see all these different dots. The darker the dot, the worse of a barrier it is. And the greener the dot, the more closely it resembles a passable structure. And so while we have this national effort that includes dams and all the crossings ever assessed anywhere, these are just those crossings that are assessed with this protocol and that come through our application, field application. And you can see, you know, when you click on a dot, the pictures come up. It's pretty cool. You can see, you know, pretty quickly when you look at the photo and you look at the color of the dot, wow, you know, some of these are pretty bad. And then you start to understand why we're having some issues with aquatic organism movement. Here are just some examples of some of the ones we've encountered recently. And you can see just how some of them really do act as dams. I mean, they are quite large. And so using the application is pretty easy. We use Survey123 for ArcGIS, as I mentioned. The data is easy to enter into the app or in an iPad or on your phone. It has offline base maps. If you have no service, it's pretty easy to use. And again, it's automatically scored, and then it feeds our prioritization. So then you can prioritize the structures based on the data in the prioritization tool itself. This protocol, basically to use it, we do the same type of training that the North Atlantic has created. So it's a quick kind of hour-and-a-half long webinar to get you familiar with what's going on, a small quiz, and then 2 days in the field shadowing someone who knows how to do the protocol and standardizing them to that person. And if you get trained, you can train other people in your organization or in your agency. And so that is train the trainer. That's kind of how we've been doing this. And so that in general is how you collect the more AOP data across your state and across the country, because that is definitely one of our data gaps and limiting factors in terms of understanding the degree of aquatic habitat fragmentation. There are some states that have no aquatic organism passage surveys. And so we want to fill in these data gaps to really make it more easy for people to identify projects and truly understand priority based on the fragmentation that truly exists. And so based on that information, I'm going to share how our prioritization tool works and how it all comes together with identifying projects, both dams and crossings. And so our prioritization framework really is geared toward improving or maintaining watershed connectivity and helping our partners identify projects. So we are a fish habitat partnership, so project identification is really huge to us and our primary objective. And because of that, we recognize our inventory is constantly growing, but we don't limit our tools until it's perfect, because it will never be perfect. I think I could probably retire and still not know where all the dams are in the country or all the road barriers. But given our objectives, we have moved forward with a pretty simple approach. So aquaticbarriers.org prioritize is where you can prioritize the barriers in the inventory. We update this 4 times a year, sometimes more. So just know it's a snapshot in time of the actual inventory itself that's living on ArcGIS Online. So if you click prioritize, you have plenty of options in terms of what you can prioritize. You can prioritize dams. You can prioritize just road-related barriers, and this includes barriers that are scored as moderate, significant, or severe using the scoring framework I showed earlier. You can do dams and road-related barriers together, and that's specifically a good idea if you have a basin that you know you have really good coverage. As I mentioned before, a lot of the state doesn't have a lot of coverage, so it's hard to do any kind of prioritization with dams and barriers unless you have a basin where you think where most of the barriers are. Then along those lines, you can do that in areas, but only looking for large-bodied fish barriers, so only the significant and severe road barriers and dams, or small-bodied fish barriers, so minor, moderate, significant, and severe. And we do that a lot in the South because of our little small endangered fish. And so just showing you what it looks like for dams in Ohio, we have lots of filters. So when you select a state that you want to prioritize dams, and then you have a lot of filters available on your left-hand side. And so I'll show you some of these things. Just know that some of this is ongoing right now because we're constantly building this inventory and the data as we work on this grant for the Great Lakes itself. But the feasibility that I mentioned earlier, that where people can code the dams based on, hey, this is never going anywhere, to, oh, this one could be an option, let's move forward with landowner outreach. That is a filter where you can eliminate things that are never going anywhere. Now, we haven't done a lot of this feasibility work in Ohio because that's generally where we rely on our partners to help us, especially those like y'all that have local knowledge. So that's kind of our next step in Ohio. But that is a filter available. We also have the climate and environmental justice filters with the climate environmental justice screening tool that we incorporated here. So if you want to look at those dams or crossings that fall into areas that have environmental justice disadvantaged census tracts, you can do that. You can also limit your prioritization to only those structures that open more than 5 miles. And those that have been marked as poor condition by the dam safety. So that does eliminate some of the smaller structures that don't have any information. These are mostly regulated structures, but you can do that as well. And we work with the Low Head Dam Task Force to help identify low head dams, and that is an ongoing effort, but you can choose to only prioritize low head dams if you want to do that. Also, we don't yet have this information for Ohio. This will be available in February, but you can choose to pull out and filter only those structures that are in a HUC 12 watershed that has a listed species in it. So that helps you get at structures that impact listed species. And so once you do that and you hit prioritize, you can then you get tiers, and you can then look at the ones that are highest tiers. And so once you click on one, this is just an example. I don't know anything about this dam, so it could be something that could never be removed, but it shows you all the information we know about this structure. So you can see, the construction material, when it was made, the condition that was last reported, and then also at the bottom, it's how many miles it opens, and you can even export it to a PDF and submit it for a grant application. And you can hit report a problem with this barrier if there's an issue with it, especially if you say, hey, this isn't going anywhere. That shoots me an email, and then I can actually change the status to infeasible. So there's lots of different ways to interact with this prioritization tool and get the information that you need. Okay, that was dams.
Just as an aside on that particular one, it was probably a I'm going to draw a blank on it. Oh, all right. Yeah, the canals. So basically, it was where you raise the boats up and down.
Okay,
it's called
navigation canal.
Lock. A lock. It was probably a lock and dam on that. Those that are on the Muskingum.
Awesome. Yeah, we've got quite a few of those in like North Carolina and beyond, where the Corps is starting to look at removing some of them, which is neat, but they're big. They're like long game kind of projects. And so here it is for road barriers. If we would just select road barriers in Ohio that we have, you can do similar filters. There's crossing type, culvert, ford, bridge, and then barrier severity. So if you want to only look at those that are complete barriers, you can filter only those down. If you use the protocol that we're using, then you can also do other filters like constriction, and other potential priority filters. And I forgot to mention too, we have a land ownership filter. So if you want to look on Forest Service land or conservation easements or other things like that, then you can do that as well. So when you click on a road barrier, you can see the information on the left that we know about it. This particular protocol, I think it was a Forest Service, old Forest Service information. I think there wasn't condition information or constriction information in there, but if you used our protocol, that would be in there. But you can see the total miles opened and a lot of other information, both through downloading it and through scrolling down in there. And then the priorities are here in the connectivity ranks. You can choose whether or not you want to look at those structures that score high on the number of miles opened versus those that score high on watershed condition, which is essentially the percent natural land cover in the floodplain of each barrier, as well as what percentage of that network is canaled or ditched. So those are basically the four main indicators that you can prioritize with. It's miles opened, and then the other three are watershed condition based, so the quality of that upstream watershed. And then if you combine those two things, that's the combined scoring. So that's how the prioritization tool works and the inventory. But I just want to real quickly put in a pitch for how now being a good time to work together to do these assessments and to also identify high priority projects. So everybody knows the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed, and lots of funding opportunities are made available through this law. And really, the key word is transformational. These funding applications are coming through, or RFPs are coming through, and the ones that are getting funded are essentially large-scale proposals that include multiple fish barriers, usually in high-priority basins for a priority species. And so that is really difficult to do unless you really know what's going on in those high-priority basins in terms of inventory. And one state that does a really good job at that is Washington. And I know that it's definitely not as simple as I'm making it sound. I recognize that, and Washington has gotten a lot of funds to do this. But that being said, if you know what's in your watersheds, holistically, comprehensively, you can really start identifying chunks of lists of projects to work on for these big funding applications. And this is just an example of an area in Washington where they've done a lot of work to identify everything. And so it's a lot easier to pull out a lot of projects. And so that's been sort of our goal in the Southeast, where we do a lot of implementation on the ground to begin this basin approach and build up the inventory, because we have not had any large funding pots to do inventory of crossings. It's all been bottom up in the Southeast. In the Northeast, they had some FEMA funding to really do a good effort at these crossing assessments from the top down, but we have not had that in the Southeast. So essentially, we are trying to identify all the unregulated small and low head dams in specific high priority basins. We're also looking to assess lots of crossings in these priority basins. We have several aquatic connectivity teams in our states. One of them is Arkansas. So I'm going to give you a couple examples of some areas where we've been doing a good job at getting this going. Arkansas is one. It's a multi-agency collaboration at these aquatic connectivity teams, and their priority basins like the Little Red River, we've been focusing on doing a lot of inventory. You can see on the left all the crossings that they're assessing. They've been using 319 money and unpaved road information to get those crossings assessed. And all of that goes into the prioritization tool. And this is what it looks like when you really know where a lot of the barriers are. And they've been able to identify several structures like this one and the one upstream that they've submitted for funding and then have since gotten these structures replaced. And so this is one on the Middle Fork that's about to come out, but they've done this with several structures. You can see this is their sort of infographic of all the work that they're doing. They've inventoried 3,200 road crossings, and they have opened up 140 miles of stream in their priority watersheds. We've also been working on doing this in the South Carolina Aquatic Connectivity Team. We found a low-hanging fruit funding application for a specific basin, the Broad River Basin. And so we submitted as a team to assess 1,800 crossings in that basin. And so our next step is really to now identify the highest priority structures and submit those for funds. And now we are working with the Fish and Wildlife Service, specifically in the basins where we have narrow endemic listed fishes. This is the slackwater darter. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service is actually doing a lot of these surveys with Endangered Species Act funding. And so this is an example that we're currently working on inventorying all these watersheds in Tennessee and Alabama. And the tri-spot darter is a really nice example of this full circle. So over the past couple of years, the Nature Conservancy has been working with an RC&D, Resource Conservation Development Council, the Limestone Valley, as well as Georgia DNR, to survey several hundred crossings in the Conasauga River Basin with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation funding. And now that they've done this, they've now been able to actually take out 5 of them. So they're coming full circle to this point where they're now replacing these structures. Also in Alabama as well, this species, looking at its whole range in Alabama and Georgia. And then finally, the Yakutafa darter and the Yazoo darter in Mississippi, as I was mentioning, we're now working fully on doing all the assessments that we can in that area. And so I say all of this to just now really quickly plug the America the Beautiful. Our partners in the South have really tried to put ourselves in a good position to take advantage of America the Beautiful funding through the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, where that bipartisan infrastructure money has gone through. We tried to put up transformational projects where our partners were putting forth several implementation projects in basins and also applying to do more culvert assessments. We had 7 partners submit separately, but all link back to our prioritization tool and our protocol. And collectively, they got about $14 million worth of funding. 2 culverts replaced by Catawba Nation, our first tribal partner, where Secretary Holland actually did a press release on the grant on the reservation. And then 10 culverts replaced by Georgia DNR for tri-spot darter, where they did all of those surveys previously. 4 Ford replacements by Arkansas Game and Fish. And also looking to identify more barriers on longleaf pine habitat in military lands and also on more Forest Service lands. So looking at this whole process holistically, we've been able to really capitalize on these grant opportunities and get some projects funded, especially in places where we were able to do that inventory first. And so I'll just end it here with that you can also track restoration in each state. Again, finding these projects is really kind of more difficult to identify where the projects have been replaced and removed. So if any are missing, please let me know. But you can see 92 dams over all of the history that we can track, and then 4 road-related barriers. I'm sure there's probably more, but there's lots of potential here. So if we can take advantage of these tools and protocol, it's possible that we can map more barriers and remove and replace more barriers and reconnect more habitat. And so with that, I will say thank you and ask if anybody has any questions.
Do we have any questions while you're thinking on that? I just wanted to, Catherine Suggs has said she can confirm that those dams in the Muskingum are the lock dams. They're owned by ODNR and part of the Muskingum State Park. So you can actually camp out on those lands. They're the old historic hand-operated locks. So you can still lock through them, except one of them I think is not functional at the moment. But I think there's 11 of them. And,
wow.
Lots of people in Ohio, she says, would like to see those go away eventually. And there's probably lots more on the other side that don't want them to go away because
Yeah.
their historical nature.
Yeah, I always hesitate to put up ones that the tool says are good, especially when we haven't done any of that. Like this, all the information you're saying, we can put that into the inventory, especially the bigger ones where there's lots of feelings.
So here, Laura Fay has asked, has anyone reached out to ODOT about this approach, Ohio Department of Transportation?
I have not yet, but would love to see if we could come up with some collaborative ways to do that.
And Laura, that's been part of conversations that we've had amongst ourselves down here who've gone through the training, is how we can, because ODOT collects data. I mean, those bridges are inspected. I mean, that's the data we were trying to use, and it just doesn't have anything about the crossing condition, what its impact on the stream is. So I think that's a step that will happen. Nate Tesler, is the database active and able to be queried, explored, or is it still in the development phase?
Yeah, it is ready. It is, I'll just say that it's constantly being updated. We're about to push a new update in the beginning of February, and we are smack dab in the middle of our Great Lakes grant, so that we're going to find more structures and all of that. So just knowing that, but yes, it is. It's up there, and if you play around with it and you find a dam that you know more info about, you can do that little report, a problem with this barrier, and that'll send me an email about whatever you know about it, and we can get that back into the inventory. Oh, sorry. I thought someone said something about that, but I see it's a different question.
and someone from ODOT is on the webinar today. So yay, let's find a way to connect in that. Kyle cites the current Ohio data, just ODNR dam data. Is it just ODNRs?
So right now it is a mix of National Inventory of Dams, ODNR, the Lowhead Dam Task Force, Lowhead Dam Inventory, and I believe a couple of the Forest Service. So if anybody knows of anything else, any kind of watershed group, list of structures, or anything that's hiding under any stones or please send it to me. I've gotten so many different types of data over the years, like access databases, spreadsheets, everything. So if you know of something, please do let me know, and we will work to get it in there. One of the next steps we also have is going to be doing that modeling approach with the NHD, where we find a whole lot of estimated dams and then we look at them by hand. That'll probably bring in a lot of your farm ponds that you're not seeing on there right now. We also look at OpenStreetMaps too, and some other places to do that. So that's coming up.
Okay. Emerson, is the crossing survey training on the website as well?
So the training itself is field-based, so it requires 2 days out in the field with someone that's already been trained, but there is a training video that folks can watch. It's not publicly available, but I can send it to, a large group of folks. It's just on a Google Drive. So the pre-webinar training is I can send that to folks.
And Emerson, I will say OKI is committed to hosting at least one, if not two trainings later this spring. Once it warms up a little bit, we can safely get out and traipse through some streams. Be looking with some of our partners that went through the training here to kind of put that on. And we will definitely be sending that information out through the Ohio Watershed Professionals Association and WAMO on that training when we have those ready. As far as that, I don't know that there's other trainings planned for Ohio yet. But the more people we get trained, the more training can happen. So. Any other questions? Okay. I'm not seeing any. Thank you very much, Kat, for coming in and continuing to spread the word on this tool. Like I said, I'm very excited by it. I think it would be an extremely useful tool for water planners across the state and across our region. We're kind of a tri-state here, so thank you very much. And with that, thank you, everyone. I think we will say, Molly Gilliland, will this webinar be shared? Sarah, that's a you question.
Sure, yes, this webinar has been recorded, and we will be posting that on the WAMO YouTube page. You'll be able to find a link on our website to the YouTube video, and look for that as soon as 24 hours from now. Sometimes it's a little bit more for Zoom to make the recording available, but once that is available, it will be posted.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kat, and have a good rest of the week and stay warm.
Thank you.